Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Parky and we'll be going through another Phyrexia All Will Be One overview for blue. So what we'll be doing today is ranking cards based on mana value and letting you know what is going to be the best card for you to fill out your mana curve. Feel free to like and subscribe. You guys can comment below on if you guys think that there's something that should be changed. It's just to help out with everybody in their limited formats. We won't be focusing on standard today. Also, you guys can join me 9:30 on Monday nights on Twitch under the same name. I'll be streaming a lot of Magic the Gathering content, and let's get on with it. So for blue 1-drops, we've got Font of Progress, 1 mana artifact. When it ATBs, it comes into play with 2 oil counters on it. Tap 3, tap itself, target player mills X cards, where X is the number of oil counters on Font of Progress. So this card isn't going to be very good because there isn't a lot of mill in the set. But if you do find a combination where you can start putting on, 2, 3, 4 more oil counters on top of this card could go off. But, it's not going to be very utilized and limited because it'll be too hard to coordinate. Next is Glistener Seer, 1 mana 0/3 creature that enters with 3 oil counters on it, and then you can tap it, remove an oil counter, and scry 1. So not too much to go through with this card. It's pretty average. It's going to help you get through some of your card draws, maybe find something you want, but it's pretty basic for a 1-drop. Now on to our 2-drops, we have Thrumming Bird. It's a 2 mana 1/1 creature with flying, and when it deals combat damage, proliferate. The reason why I have this ranked so low is because you're not going to be wanting to proliferate super early because you won't have enough counters on the board, and then when it is time you want to be proliferating, you're probably not going to be able to put through that damage because there'll be something with reach or flying on the other side that'll be able to deal with it, or there's some -1/-1 stuff in the set to deal with it also. So that's about it for that. Escaped Experiment, 2 mana 2/1 artifact creature. When it attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -X/-0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So there is an artifact synergy going on in the set. I believe it's blue-white. And this card is pretty basic. It's not going to be too great because you're going to have to minus it quite a bit for some creatures to, make sure this creature gets through because it only does have 1 toughness on it. But from that's about it. Prologue to Phyrexia, 2 mana instant. Each opponent gets a poison counter. You draw a card. So I actually, I quite like this card. I feel like it doesn't do a whole lot, but it does allow you to put an early poison counter on somebody, gets you your card draw, so it replaces it. It's a decent common. It'll be a little bit filler, but I have a feeling this might be a little bit of a cut based on the fact that you only have your, 23, 24 playables in each draft. Malcator's Watcher, 2 mana 1/1 artifact creature, flying, vigilance, and when it dies, draw a card. So there's a lot going on here. It's going to be pretty good early on again. It's going to be a good blocker, and then when it blocks, it's going to allow you to, replace it. And it's an artifact creature, so there's a couple synergies going on, so I think this card is pretty decent for a 2-drop. Icarus Synthesizer, 2 mana 1/3 creature. When you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it, and as long as it has 4 oil or more oil counters, it gets +2/+0 and can't be blocked. So I actually quite like this as a common. By the way, I won't be ranking cards based on its rarity, but it will probably affect on what cards are better and worse, but you will see some rares and mythics dropping down pretty low on the charts. So back to the Synthesizer. This is going to be a really good blocker early on, and it's going to allow you to build up those oil counters, and it's going to get damage in late game. So I think this is a very solid common, especially for blue that's going to be a little bit more controlling. So on board with the Synthesizer. Atmosphere Surgeon, 2 mana 2/1 creature. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it, just like the previous card, and then you can remove an oil counter and target creature gets flying until end of turn, and that's as a sorcery. So not a bad card. It allows itself to have flying. It can allow some really big creatures to have flying also, so it's a little bit dynamic. It's not a good blocker though, so I don't enjoy that about it. But overall, it's got some flexibility with what it can do, and I like the fact that you don't have to pay anything with the ability, so that makes this card pretty solid. Next is Experimental Augury, 2 mana instant. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, proliferate. So this is going to be your staple draw in blue, and I think this card is going to probably fill 1 to 2 slots on every blue deck if you can. Next is Mercurial Spelldancer, 2 mana 2/1 creature. It can't be blocked, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. And then when it deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So really, really solid. It's going to build up oil counters early. It's going to push through damage early. It's going to allow your instants and sorceries to be doubled, which is fantastic. And it's going to happen quite often in blue if you can get this down on turn 2 or 3. And this is honestly just a solid card. Even if it comes down late, I understand it's a little bit slow, but it still pushes through with some damage. So that has that going for it always. On to our 3 drops. Eye of Malkator, 3-mana artifact. When it ETBs, scry 2, and then when another artifact ETBs, this artifact becomes a 4/4 until end of turn. Not too bad. I don't like the fact that on turn 3 you're just scrying 2, and then you've got to wait. But I mean, it is on turn 4 going to be a 4/4 occasionally, but the fact that it's not going to remain that 4/4 is a little bit worrisome for me. It's not going to block much. It's just going to be a dead body, and you're going to have better plays to do for a 3-drop. Next is Chrome Prowler, 3-mana 3/2 artifact creature with flash. Enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. So honestly, the last card and this pair really well together. So you can tap something down, you can put up a blocker. Those work really well, but it's a very limited interaction between those two. There aren't many other flash artifacts in the format. So this card's okay. It's got a small toughness, so little but doesn't allow it to get through. It's gonna probably trade off with something that's smaller, so I don't enjoy that about it. On to Gitaxian Raptor, 3-mana 1/4, creature with flying, ETBs with 3 oil counters on it, and then you can remove an oil counter and it gets +1, -1 until end of turn. So similar to the Mistwalker in Kaldheim, so it's a little flexible, it's a great blocker in the air, but I don't like the fact that this is going to run out of oil counters eventually if you use it. You could use it all at once, you can use it once each turn, but it does get worse and worse if you have to use it once and not all at once, because then you're just going to be there as a blocker that's not going to remove their creatures. So there is that. Next is Icar Moon Gauntlet, 3-mana artifact. Planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate and -12 loyalty. Take an extra turn after this one. So I really think that there's a high ceiling with that. And the fact that you have, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. I think that's very flexible. It allows Proliferate to be a little bit more useful. It allows you to use other abilities and then add more loyalty on top of that. So it's very useful only if you can draft a Planeswalker first. If you find this maybe mid-pack on your first pack or first round, maybe grab this if it trails later in the draft, and you might pick up a Planeswalker on pack 2 or pack 3, but this will never be a pick 1 pack 1 grab. So unfortunately it has a very low floor with it too, so it's a tough mythic to fall back on. Next is Tamiyo's Logbook, 3-mana artifact, tap 6 and itself draw a card, but it costs 1 less for each other artifact you control. And in a set where there are a lot of artifacts, I think that this could be quite cheap, but it does have to have those on the battlefield at the same time to make this useful. But it's similar to the Codex from the previous set or 2 sets ago, where you focused on domain. And it's going to have its place in some decks, and it's just not going to be worth it in others. So that's basically that. Blade of Shared Souls, 3-mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin. So whenever this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 rebel creature token and then attach this to it. When it becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Blade of Shared Souls remains attached to it, you may have that creature become a copy of another target creature you control. And then it has equipped too. So this has, again, high ceiling, low floor. So, it comes in 3-mana 2/2, and it can copy another creature when it comes in. Honestly, if you don't have any other creatures on board, this isn't going to do a whole lot. It's just going to be an undervalued 2/2. And it's easy to see that a lot of these cards are very situational. So a lot of things you can do in this set, but it does limit you on what you can do because you don't know what you're going to be able to find in the draft, or in your sealed pool, it's very reliant on what it can work with. Next is Trawler Drake, 3 mana 0/0 creature with flying, but it ETBs with an oil counter on it, and it gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it, and it gets an oil counter every time you cast a non-creature spell. You can easily see that in blue, you're going to be wanting a bunch of non-creature spells. You're going to want to add all these oil counters onto your creatures, and it's going to really benefit, especially this card, having, a flyer that's going to grow after, 2 or 3 turns that it's been on the battlefield. This is going to be a very solid card. Late game, early game, it's going to be great. Unctus Grand Meta Tech, 3 mana 2/4 legendary artifact creature. Other blue creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control also get +1/+1, and then you can pay a Phyrexia mana until end of turn. Target creature you control becomes a blue artifact in addition to its other colors and types. Activate only as a sorcery. So this card isn't too bad. It does rely on other things to be on the board, especially artifact creatures. The fact that you can turn something into a blue artifact is handy, but I do find that this card, while it's good and it's going to pump all your creatures up, I find that you're going to be discarding a ton of cards and going through your deck quite fast. And in a limited format, that's not always the best thing. So, especially because blue has lots of card draw, and you're probably going to want to use those. This card has its upside, but it's not going to be great late game. On to Distorted Curiosity, 3 mana sorcery with Corrupted, so it costs 2 less when an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, and you get to draw 2 cards. So honestly, for 3 mana, draw 2, not too bad. And then if it's a 1 mana, draw 2, that's fantastic. So I think this is going to also fall inside the blue decks. It looks like blue's going to move very quickly through their deck because there's lots of card draw, and there's lots of way to filter your draws. So I do really enjoy this card. Unctus's Retrofitter, 3 mana 2/3 creature, Toxic 1, so this is the first Toxic we've seen in blue, and then when ETBs, up to 1 target creature you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4 for as long as Unctus remains on the battlefield. So this is a fantastic card. This has a decent, but it's a little bit small on the power for a 3 mana 2/3, but honestly, the Toxic's great. The fact that you get a 4/4 out of this, which is fantastic. You've got some really early creatures that you'd love to buff. You've got the 1 mana Flying Vigilance. You've got the 1 mana Flying that also gets to proliferate for you. You've got some really good targets for this card in blue. And then on top of that, this card can sometimes put a Toxic counter down, and that's just one more thing to proliferate. So this is going to be your best 3-drop in blue. On to 4-drops, we've got Mind Splice Apparatus, 4 mana artifact with flash. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. And then instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less for each oil counter on it. So I think this is going to be an okay card for a bit, but the fact that you're going to have instants and sorcery spells that cost 1 less, most of them only going to be requiring like 2 or 3 oil counters to fully affect it. There aren't many sorceries and instants that cost more than that. There might be the Twilight in blue and maybe one other, but we'll get to those. So this card's going to have a little bit of impact on your gameplay, but not a whole lot, I feel. Next is Tamiyo's Immobilizer, 4 mana artifact. When ETBs, it comes in with 4 oil counters on it. You can tap, remove an oil counter, tap target artifact or creature. So I just find this is pretty worthless for the fact that you have to pay 4, and then on top of that, you run out of oil counters on it. It's not going to do anything else on the board, so I think this is a pretty mediocre uncommon. Gitaxian Anatomist, 4 mana 2/5 creature. ETBs, you may tap it if you do proliferate, and that's honestly a pretty big butt for a creature that's just going to help you protect your life total from Toxic and any other damage. And then it has the proliferate that you're going to want in this sort of deck. So it's not a bad 4-drop, but it's not anything fantastic. Transplant Theorist is a 4 mana 2/4 artifact creature. When it or another artifact ETBs, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Then you have pay 2, put target card from the graveyard on the bottom of your library. So This card's going to be alright. It's not going to be anything special, to be honest. It just seems like another filter card that's going to help you find what you need in your deck. Next is Encroaching Mycosynth. 4 mana artifact, non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this is a really odd wording for me because I'm not sure it says non-land at the start, but then it also says same is true for permanent spells you control. I suppose a land's not a spell, so I guess it's just going to include everything that's not a land that's anywhere in your hand, in your deck, or on the battlefield. It's going to have lots of synergies in the set. It seems a little bit complicated, but I could see this actually becoming very strong and very useful in the set. I just need to see this played for a bit, so I'm putting it a little bit below the best cards, but it has potential. Meldweb Curator. 4 mana 3/4 creature. When it ETBs, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. And this is going to be a fantastic card. Anytime you can reuse an instant or sorcery that you've put in your deck, most likely that card is going to be a very strong card, or one that you would typically use for removal or putting on poison counters, drawing cards, pump effects. It's going to allow you to get more value out of those good instants and sorceries you put in your deck. On to Jace the Perfected Mind. 4 mana, 1 being Phyrexian, 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker. If you pay with life, then it becomes a 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker. It's got +1 until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-0. Then it has -2, target player mills 3 cards, then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards, otherwise you draw 1. So minimum, you're milling somebody 3 and you get to draw a card, which is great. And then -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. So this comes in with 5 loyalty, you can mill somebody immediately for 15. That's very, very good and limited, and I really enjoy that. I think Jace is going to be a solid planeswalker in the set. Then you have Tekathal, Inquiry Dominus, 4 mana 3/5, legendary creature with flying. If you would proliferate twice instead, and then pay 1 and 2 Phyrexian mana, remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control. Put an indestructible counter on Tekathal, Inquiry Dominus. I think this card is phenomenal. I think the fact that it's flying, it can protect you in the air with that big toughness. The double proliferate is fantastic. And then you can really just remove some counters. Like other ones have to sacrifice creatures. It has to, I can't remember exactly what the other Dominus do, but I think the remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers is very, very powerful. And I really enjoy that card. On to blue 5+ drops. So we've got Meldweb Strider, 5 mana 5/5 Vigilance Artifact Vehicle. When it ETBs, it comes in with an oil counter. You can remove 1, and it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, but it has crew 3. I like the fact that it can become a creature without being crewed by just removing an oil counter, but I do wish it had 2 oil counters on it because it would have more flexibility that way, but I suppose it's a common, so that makes sense. On to Quicksilver Fisher, 5 mana 4/3 flyer creature. When it ETBs, draw a card and discard a card. So you see this quite a bit in the set. I like the fact that it's a flyer, but I think I'd prefer some of the other creatures that have this ability, so it's an okay 5-drop. Next is Vivisurgeon's Insight, 5 mana sorcery, draw 3 cards, and proliferate. And this is going to be very, very solid. I think if you comboed this with the artifact that drops the cost for sorceries and instant, this would be the deck for it. Otherwise, it's a little bit expensive, but it's still alright with the proliferate on top. Next is the Blue Sun's Twilight, 2 blue and an X. Sorcery, gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token that's a copy of that creature. And this is very, very solid. And again, with that artifact, it synergizes with it. It makes it a lot cheaper to cast and get up to the 5. This card is going to be very, very good. It can just flip a board instantly. I guess at sorcery speed, but you get what I mean. And honestly, it's just a very solid one compared to some of the other Twilights, but it's not as impactful as Watchful Blister Zoa, 6 mana 4/4 creature, and I like that it's a jellyfish. It's pretty fun. Flying, ETBs with an oil counter on it, and when it dies, draw cards equal to the number of oil counters on it. And there's tons of ways in the set to add oil counters onto something. So if you're able to do that, you could draw, you know, up to God knows how many cards just based on, you know, just proliferating, adding more oil counters other ways. It's going to be a very, very solid 4/4 in the air. Now on to your interaction removal. We've got Minor Misstep, 1 mana instant, counter target spell with mana value 1 or less. And I think this is a little bit too narrow. In limited, standard, it's just not a very good card. Next is Aspirant's Ascent, 1 mana instant, target creature gets +1/+3, gains flying and toxic 1, which is a good way to get in some toxic damage, just to, you know, maneuver around some creatures that the opponent has. So not too bad. And then pairing that with Proliferate, you're gonna probably bump that up a couple times and move them closer to 10. Bring the Ending, 2 mana instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, and then Corrupted, you can just counter that spell. So I think this is a very solid, you know, beginning of the game, it does the job. It's a little bit better than Spell Pierce in the way that you can obviously utilize it to slow them down, but later in the game, it's just a straight up counter. And I really, really like that about this card, and this could even move up the list later as we play. Next is Serum Snare, 2 mana instant, and it bounces a creature to its owner's hand. If that permanent had mana value 3 or less, Proliferate. And again, really enjoy anything that has Proliferate. I'll probably be valuing those sort of things a little bit higher, especially in blue, because there's so much to Proliferate. You have your poison counters, oil counters, even the indestructible counters. They're all fair game. After, we've got a very similar card, Reject Imperfection, 3 mana instant, counter target spell. If that spell's mana value is 3 or less, Proliferate. So again, same reasoning, very solid, but this time you get to counter something before it even comes into the battlefield, which is very good. After that, we've got Mesmerizing Dose, 3 mana enchantment aura, enchant creature, and then when it ETBs, it taps it and locks it down, and then you get to Proliferate. So I really enjoy that, the fact that it's just going to be your basic lockdown blue enchantment aura. You just enjoy this. It's at commons. You're going to see these quite often. The only thing you got to watch out for is bouncing and sacrificing, but I suppose that's just what you have to deal with in blue. Hopefully you get more counters than you do this, but this is going to be your most accessible removal in blue. And that's going to be it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the blue overview. If you did, like and subscribe. Again, feel free if you want to comment down below. Let me know what you think of what my rankings are and what you might change, because like I said, I haven't played with the cards. I haven't seen the cards being played, and I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. Feel free again to join me on Monday nights at 9:30 on Twitch. And you can check out my other videos for all the other colors. I'll be posting the artifacts and your multicolored later on. Have a good day, guys. Ciao.